Okay, back with you on the Bronx Buzz. As promised, we talked about the Trust for Public Lands in our first segment, but now we've got the new economy project and a look at how to really do the right thing in the South Bronx on our waterfronts. It's been an ongoing dialogue for generations. So let us welcome from the New Economy Project. It is Will Spisak. He's the Senior Program Associate. Will, nice to have you with us. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
And then our buddy, who's the senior organizer for South Bronx United, is Matthew Shore. What a excellent last name, considering what we're working on. His last name is Shore. Was that deliberate, or it just worked out that way?
I like to think it worked out that way.
Oh, okay. Because, like my last name is Axelbank, and I really have nothing to do with the financial industry. So there you go. Anyway, Will, let's just talk about the new economy project and what you do and why this particular project is blood and guts core for what you guys do.
Yeah, for sure. So New Economy Project, we're a citywide organization. We've been around for 30 years, and our mission is to build a new economy that works for all New Yorkers based on principles of cooperation, racial justice, and economic justice, and ecological sustainability. So we have a fight and build strategy that we've been implementing for
a what and build?
Fight and build. Yeah. So
fight and build.
Yes, so we fight against extractive wealth practices, debt collectors, big banks, the industries that have redlined Black and brown communities for decades. And while we're fighting against those institutions through our legal team, through our organizers and our campaigns, we also have a build strategy where we try and build new institutions that are rooted in neighborhood equity, that are led by community members directly and implement economic democracy on the ground. So one of the tools that we use to build this new vision of a new economy is called a community land trust. And a community land trust, or a CLT, is an organization that seeks to take land off of the speculative market and hold it in perpetuity for the benefit of the community, and doing this to allow for the development and preservation of deeply affordable housing, community space, commercial space, and important for this conversation, green space, particularly in neighborhoods that have been neglected by the city in terms of accessing equitable green space.
I'm still focused on the notion of fight and build, and having been a talk show host in the Bronx for 3 decades. This is core. This is right at the center of, I can't even tell you how many times I've had a dialogue on television about exactly those kinds of issues. This is core for us. Now, who do I need to ask about NYCLI, which is the New York City Community Land Initiative? Do you deal with that, Will, or is that so? Why don't you start and tell us about that? And then I'm going to bring in Matthew Shore. Ironically, is going to talk about the shore in the South Bronx.
Yeah, so we actually call it Nicely.
Sorry.
Yeah, so New York City Community Land Initiative. So that's a coalition that our organization, New Economy Project, helped to found, and we facilitate and coordinate the coalition. It's a coalition of community land trusts from around New York City. So currently we have about 20 or so community land trusts. These are neighborhood-based organizations that are grassroots led, that are bringing community members together to identify land that could be stewarded by the community for the benefit of the community. So we have groups in all 5 boroughs. We have groups in the Bronx, in Brooklyn, Queens, that have identified either public land or land that they are interested in acquiring and taking off of the market so that they can maintain that property for the long-term benefit of the community. And South Bronx Unite and the Mont Haven Port Morris Community Land Stewards are a member of Nicely, and they're doing tremendous work to advance this kind of vision for the South Bronx.
Last question for you, then I'll bring in Matthew. How new is this concept? I hadn't really heard about it. It's probably had been out there, people were thinking thinking about it. Maybe we ought to do this. But recently it's come to the fore that people are
Yes.
turning to these kinds of arrangements when they have properties or buildings or other situations that they can't figure out because the powers that be are just not letting it happen. So now they're looking to own kind of themselves. How new is this, or has this been around a while?
Yeah, we have a really exciting and growing movement here in New York City that's relatively new. But the idea of a community land trust is not new. In particular, the CLT model was developed during the civil rights movement, actually by Black farmers in the South that were consistently being excluded from accessing good land that they can live on and sustain themselves with. So they formed community land trusts to pool their resources and formed the first community land trust in Albany, Georgia. And then eventually that model migrated to the cities where communities were experiencing gentrification and higher rents and displacement. And they were able to then use this same model to take
To
land.
address those
Exactly.
kinds of things. All right,
Absolutely.
Matthew, let's stop. Let's get you involved here. The dialogue about the waterfront, the South Bronx waterfront, goes on. What are the issues that are important to you, and how can this process address those issues, and what are you hoping to see?
Right. So our community land trust, the Mott Haven Port Morris Community Land Stewards, is actively organizing residents in the South Bronx, specifically in the Mott Haven Port Morris neighborhoods, who are most impacted by how public land in the neighborhood has harmed them and not benefited them. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about a lack of access to our waterfront on the peninsula that we live in, which is mostly comprised of publicly owned land. The community came together years ago
Excuse
to,
me. So let's just talk about the irony of that. So we, meaning the general public, doesn't have access to public land that is on the waterfront of the South Bronx. That doesn't work. I mean, if it's public land, well, then the public, I mean, I'm
right,
not speaking out of turn. It just doesn't make sense. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I couldn't resist.
right. And the community agrees with you, Gary. So that's why they formed this community waterfront plan to change that. They want access. They want, the ability to have more green spaces and trees in a neighborhood that is suffering from the highest rates of asthma and air pollution, not only in the city and state, but in the nation. So this waterfront plan is about access, creating more green spaces for better health outcomes, and also with addressing the high risk of flooding in our area. So we
Sure.
recently applied for an EPA community change grant from the Inflation Reduction Act to be able to not activate the entire waterfront because that's costly, around $125 million we're talking about, but to apply for $20 million to activate to begin activating one to two different parts of the waterfront.
Well, I
So
want to ask you, let me just ask you before we run out of time, let me ask you about the Heart Center. Heart, which I loved, health, education, and the art. This has been a vision for a number of people in the South Bronx for a long time. Talk to me about the Heart Center, what it is, and what your hope is ultimately.
yes, so we invite people to, visit our website, southbronxunite.org, to learn more about the Heart Center. It's an amazing project. We're opening a new community center in 2027 that
I'm
is
going to
right
be
in the middle.
applauding while you talk. Go ahead. I think it's
That's
wonderful.
right.
Go ahead.
Yes, that's right in the middle of Mott Haven, right next to Mott Haven houses and close to Patterson houses. And it's going to be a part of our community land trust and managed by community members, truly a grassroots project. And, this building used to be the former Lick and Recovery Center, which, from the 70s to pretty much close to 2010 was offering holistic health services, many of which were pioneered by the Young Lords and leaders like Dr. Matula Shakur, who brought things like acupuncture to communities suffering from drug addiction. And it was an amazing facility. And then, unfortunately, the building closed around 2012, 2013.
I just want to move it ahead. So then a nice way of it emerging in the modern era is to have this Center for Health education in the arts, right? I mean, that's what we're saying. The legacy of it is strong in this direction.
Absolutely. So we're excited about that. We're going to be teaming up with Green City Fours, partners like Upbeat NYC, and bringing holistic health services to a community that so desperately needs it.
And then you also have the Mott Haven Port Morris waterfront plan, and that is what you originally started talking about. Because if it's public land, let's make it used by the public, for the public, et cetera, right? I mean, I'm putting words into your mouth, but I know you feel that way.
Yes, public land for public good. And I mean, this ties back to the work that our coalition at Nicely is doing. We're advocating for what's known as the Community Land Act, which, includes important bills before the city council, like public land for public good. So, this bill is something that would, when the city disposes of public land, would prioritize community land trusts like the Mott Haven Port Morris Community Land Stewards for first priority to be able to acquire that land for community benefit.
Yep, certainly makes sense. Will, just about a minute and a half left. I'm going to make a judgment here, and you tell me if I'm wrong. The Bronx and the South Bronx and these projects are core exactly what the new economy project should be about. In other words, when you think about what we're doing and what we need to address, where else? Right there in the South Bronx, right? I mean, this is what it's all about.
Absolutely. And we're so happy that we have groups like South Bronx and Mott Haven, Port Morris Community Land Stewards that are leading this work on the ground. And hopefully we're going to get those bills passed and make it easier for new groups to implement their visions for their community.
If there are people, and I know in the Bronx there are people who say, you know what, this is a great concept. And for example, in my neighborhood, I've got this problem. Or people in the East Bronx may say that about their waterfront. People in Soundview have a waterfront that they also feel have not been handled properly. Who do they contact? What do they do? And how do they get involved in developing? Because it takes time developing this kind of thing.
Yeah, they could definitely reach out to us at New Economy Project. You can find us neweconomynyc.org, or reach out to South Bronx Unite. We have a Green Space Equity Coalition that's meeting regularly to help groups plan for projects like that. So we'd be happy to connect and help anyone who has a vision for their community.
That's what they're about. Listen, Matthew, you got to say hello to my buddy Michael Johnson and all my friends down there in the South Bronx who have been just never giving up, always fighting for justice, for racial justice, for environmental justice, and really just to have, develop our own land for ourselves. I think it's great, Matthew. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Yep. Great. Folks, that will do it. There you see a new way to develop the Bronx. We do it with Bronx communities. Nobody could be more enthusiastic about it than me. And that will do it. So we thank both Matthew and Will, and we thank Mary Alice Lee from the Trust for Public Land in our first segment. And you know what we say, if the curtain don't fall and the creek don't rise, we'll be back next week. Good night.